Hi, I'm Alice, and this is video 4 of the Breaking Ground series, A Journey of Change. In our last video, we focused on the internal zone of awareness. That's our bodily affective states, all the sensations that happen inside our own skin. We looked at how the middle zone interprets what's going on. And we spoke about the problem of triggering, where that primitive part of our brain, the amygdala, is looking for the similar to in our everyday experiences and bringing forward an emotional response to tell us what to feel about what we experience based on our past responses. Mostly it's a good thing, but not when we have a lot of unmet needs that keep pushing to be completed in us. Today we're going to focus on the external zone of awareness. That's about the ways in which we go towards the world to satisfy our needs through all of our speech and behavior and action. In the next video, we'll focus on our senses, our 5 senses. So it's this middle zone again that labels what's going on in this outer zone of awareness. It's the middle zone that's full of our faulty interpretations, our beliefs, and these things are what cause us a lot of pain in our lives. So we need to become aware of our own process. That is what we're doing, how we're doing it, and its effect on ourselves and others in our world. It's only with awareness that we will be empowered to make a different choice about how we will connect to the world in order to satisfy our needs. So we often blame the people we love for the problems we perceive they are causing us by not responding to our needs. And we try to make others change. We want our circumstances to change. We want anything outside of us to change so that we will be okay. But we cannot change or control or manipulate others to be or do what we need them to do. And when they don't meet our needs, we often feel resentment, anger, bitterness. We feel hurt and bruised. And when we're triggered, our response is way more than the situation calls for because it's about our buried, unmet needs. Richard Rohr says that if we don't transform our pain, we will transmit it in some way. So we can only work with our responses. We need to own our part. It's when we're aware of what we're doing and when we become aware of the unfinished business that we're bringing into our relationships that we can do something to help ourselves. So we need to see how we co-create our own problems. And often what causes a lot of problems and pain in our relationships is the expectation we place on others to help us meet our needs. So this expectation we place on others is often too great a burden when it's connected to childhood wounding. So I'm going to share some of the ways in which my unfinished business has caused a lot of problems in my life. So let's talk about loneliness for a minute, because many people struggle with loneliness. It is a painful, shameful self-experience that we often hide. So I experienced rejection at the age of 7, and I came to expect that I would be rejected. And so I shut myself down in self-protection. I no longer connected to my world well, and so I felt great loneliness. In fact, I felt loneliness for 40 years of my life. It was like this insatiable void on the inside of me. I often felt on the outside of, not part of, not wanted, not welcome, not needed. It's a very painful self-experience. So I would move towards relationships to try and attach in order to meet this need in me, this void. But people would experience my neediness. I needed something from them to fill something in me. And so I would often experience a bit of an arm's length approach from friends, which would cause immense hurt and anger and resentment. And then I would judge them again for being people that just didn't care. So I experienced rejection. Many people experience rejection. And when you've experienced rejection, you may come to expect that you will be rejected. When you've experienced abandonment, again, on that unconscious level, you have formed an expectation that nobody will be there for you. So we form these expectations based on our past experiences. I made a bitter judgment about my world at the age of 7, that nobody cares, nobody would be there. And these expectancies influenced my behavior. So I expected I would be rejected. So I didn't offer too much of myself. I protected myself. But in that protecting myself, I was not offering enough for people to respond to me. I was not offering enough for people to show me that they cared. So I felt untouched by my world. I felt not responded to. My behavior exacerbated my loneliness, but I was prone to blame it on others for not caring for me. So we need to own our beliefs and become aware of our expectations about how we will be met in the world in order to make sure we're not provoking the exact behavior from the world that we are judging them for. So when we have these, it can be like our bitter root judgments, and they defile our relationships. Like Hebrews 12 says, see to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. In the Amplified Hebrews, it says, see to it that no root of resentment springs up. Maybe you can relate to resentment more than bitterness. So it's important to tune into these bodily affective states to identify our beliefs, because we feel what we believe, and it's often that they're held outside of our awareness. We don't know it unless we connect to our emotions. So it's important to be aware of what's going on inside your own skin. And once I had identified the I statement in my experience, I don't belong, then I could finish the unfinished business in me. So in emotional distress one day, I, for the first time, recognized I don't belong as being my belief. Again, I took it to the Lord, and He said to me, you belong with me. You've always belonged with me. You're mine. And in that moment, the unfinished business was completed. The void was filled in me. I have never felt loneliness again. And I suddenly started to be able to form relationships with other people because I was able to go towards them without expecting to be rejected. And so now I have friends that my heart knows are mine. And it was like in that moment, the desert on the inside of me was turned to a garden. God met my need. So God is able to satisfy these unmet needs profoundly if we are prepared to own them and bring them to Him. But to cooperate with God, we've got to own what's going on. So this COVID lockdown time has been a time of immense storms in our relationships, in our lives in general. So let me share again with you another way in which my unfinished business has so defiled our marriage. So in a couple of months preceding lockdown, abandonment had started to be triggered in me, but it was exacerbated terribly during lockdown because my husband became intensely involved in his studies. It felt like he was shutting me out, that he wasn't seeing me, that he wasn't responding to me. And I felt immense pain, more than I've ever felt before. Pain of abandonment. But more than that, I felt intense anger and bitterness about it. It felt like there was this wall between us. And quite honestly, I didn't feel that I could find my way back. So sitting in this feeling of abandonment in the garden with God the one day, I was also able for the first time to put my finger on betrayal. It was like my husband was not the person I thought he should be. But once I'd identified that, I also had the realization that, again, this was about boarding school, because I did experience extreme abandonment there. But more than that, in that place, I also experienced betrayal of my sister. It was like she was not the person I thought she should be. So do you see again, this similar to the triggering that brings forward all this emotion. So sitting in this, I was able to forgive my sister, to repent of my ungodly responses, which was to hold on to this anger, to make a bitter judgment about my world as being a world that would not care, that would not be there. And having dealt with all of that, I still felt a bit of suffering, and I sat with it. I needed to put my finger on what is this suffering. The suffering was about not being responded to. And it was only when I identified that I was able to bring it to the Lord, and He identified with me in it. He responded to me in it. He finished the unfinished business in me. So from that point on, which has been most of lockdown, I felt joy, incredible levels of joy. I have felt complete peace, complete contentment. It's like I have a renewed marriage. I have overflowing love for my husband again. There is not a hint of hurt. So how can that be? Well, it's the unfinished business that we bring into our relationships. We're often so unaware that it's affecting our relationships. So childhood wounding, it's not intentional, but children are very egocentric. They take everything back to mean something about themselves. And for all of us, our beliefs are in place about ourselves before you've left primary school, even earlier than that. So, children see through the eyes of the child. They understand themselves from their limited understanding. And what we come to believe about ourselves as children is often the same thing that we are believing as adults. And along with these beliefs come the unmet needs that form the unfinished situations that are pushing to be completed in us. So it's very hard for us to take responsibility for these things, often because they sit so far outside of our awareness. And my message to you is definitely not one of blame. Neither am I blaming those who wounded you. I have immense compassion for people that continue to struggle in relationships with deep pain, because I've lived with it. I know it well. And we're made for life-giving relationships, firstly with God and with one another. And it's a tragedy when these things are disrupted by childhood wounding. So these things can change, but they're not going to change if we think that it's only going to come from outside of ourselves. So if we are aware of the need that's being highlighted under our pain, we can help ourselves better. Many of us are going to continue to turn to our usual strategies of avoiding pain. But that leaves the unfinished business still incomplete. It leaves the child suffering. But Jesus wants to complete these things. So we may not have the inner strength right now to take these things to God, but we can do things to strengthen our inner being. That's mostly about what breaking ground is about. Strengthening this inner being, so in time you can go deeper in God. So this video may have triggered you. I'm sorry if you feel blue and unsettled. Of course, that's not my intention. But if we don't understand these things, we continue to suffer. The child in us continues to hurt. So take some time to nurture yourself. Do something that you love, that you enjoy. Speak kindly to yourself. Take care of the child in you, because that child has been invalidated enough. Don't be fearful that breaking ground is only about dealing with painful things. The process is likely to be uncomfortable for many of us, because growing is uncomfortable. We don't want to take responsibility for these things. But it is immensely empowering and worth it when we do. So once again, most of this course is about strengthening the inner being so that we can take a slow and gentle journey towards healing. Thanks for listening. In the next video, we will finish our external zone of awareness and conclude on this section of awareness.